The first thing Thomas Cranmer felt was not flame, but the slow death of his skin. Contemporary witnesses describe the way heat dried the outer layers until they cracked like old parchment, each split releasing a faint hiss as trapped moisture turned to steam. While popular accounts suggest a calm and dignified martyrdom, the reality was a brutal medical collapse. Long before the flames reached his chest, the heat beneath his fingernails began to boil the soft tissue, making the nails lift and curl as if trying to escape his own body. Muscles contracted violently, pulling his arms into unnatural shapes that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with nerve endings firing in panic. As the smoke thickened, Cranmer choked on the burning air, each breath tearing through his throat like sand. Yet in this chaos, he performed the act history remembers most. He pushed his right hand, the hand that had signed his forced recantation, directly into the fire. Witnesses say the skin blistered instantly, then blackened, then peeled away in sheets, revealing bone within seconds. This was no serene acceptance of death. It was a final, desperate rejection of manipulation. To understand how Thomas Cranmer became a human spectacle, we must first examine the forces that decided he had to burn. Long before Thomas Cranmer stood in the rising smoke of Broad Street, he was a quiet scholar whose mind reshaped an entire kingdom. Born in 1489, he rose not through ambition but through intellect, moving from Cambridge classrooms to the highest religious office in England. As Archbishop of Canterbury, he became the careful, book-loving theologian who helped Henry VIII justify the annulment that forever altered the English Church. While popular memory reduces him to a single political tool, historical documents reveal a thoughtful, gentle man who often hesitated before making decisions, aware that every signed decree carried human cost. But his strengths were also his vulnerabilities. His loyalty to Henry VIII bound him emotionally to a ruler whose policies shifted between reward and danger. His reformist beliefs, milder than many Protestants, yet firm in principle, made him a symbol of religious change under Edward. And beneath his composed exterior was a man who feared the brutality of the Marian regime long before it reached him. Contemporary letters show moments of quiet anxiety, hints of a man who sensed the storm gathering. When Edward VI died in 1553, that storm arrived. Mary sought not only to restore Catholicism, but to make examples of those who had built the Protestant order. Cranmer was the highest target, the architect of a new theology, the public face of England's religious shift, and the man whose execution would announce a total reversal of power. For Mary's advisors, eliminating Cranmer was not punishment, it was ceremony. But for Mary Vant and her circle, he was more than a theologian. He was a symbol that had to be dismantled completely before the pyre was lit. The destruction of Thomas Cranmer did not begin at the stake. It began on paper, in chambers where power hid behind legal vocabulary. While popular storytelling frames his execution as the simple result of religious disagreement, contemporary records show a coordinated machine engineered to crush him long before flames touched his skin. The architects of this machinery were Mary I and Bishop Stephen Gardiner, two figures whose political survival depended on erasing the Protestant reforms Cranmer had helped create. The first step was legal isolation. Cranmer was taken to Oxford in 1555, where a series of staged heresy trials unfolded. These hearings were not genuine inquiries, but scripted performances. Canon law was manipulated so that his appeals to Rome were automatically invalid, despite Mary's regime claiming loyalty to Rome. The message was unmistakable. No law could save him because the law itself had been rewritten for his destruction. Next came propaganda. Sermons across England painted him as the mastermind of national instability, the man who had misled kings and poisoned souls. Pamphlets circulated claiming divine justice demanded his death. This was not simply punishment, it was narrative control. By the time the public heard Cranmer's name, they were already told what to think. Meanwhile, the regime worked relentlessly to shape public opinion. Processions, public readings, and scripted debates presented Cranmer as a defeated heretic. The goal was simple. By the time the stake was built, the crowd should view his death not as cruelty but as moral cleansing. But stripping his office and chaining his body was only the first stage. The Marian regime understood that to erase a legacy, one must first break the mind that created it. By the time Thomas Cranmer entered Bocardo prison, the Marian regime had already decided his fate. What followed was not simple confinement, but a slow, deliberate unraveling of his mind. While popular accounts suggest a straightforward imprisonment, contemporary descriptions show conditions designed to erode identity. His cell was cold, damp, and narrow, its stone walls absorbing every breath and returning nothing. He was denied steady contact, monitored relentlessly, and fed the kind of uncertainty that corrodes the human mind more effectively than chains. Interrogations soon followed. They were not violent in the physical sense, but psychologically calculated. Theologians confronted him with complex arguments, shifting doctrines, and emotional pressure. One day he was promised mercy, the next, execution. This tactic, known in modern psychology as approach avoidance conditioning, pushes the victim into mental exhaustion, forcing compliance through confusion. The forced recantations emerged from this climate. Each confession he signed was less a statement of belief and more a symptom of cognitive collapse. Witnesses noted his trembling hand, the hesitations between sentences, the quiet shock of a man fighting himself. Public humiliations sealed the assault. Cranmer was paraded as a broken scholar, a warning to all who challenged the restored Catholic order. By the time he walked toward the stake, his body was weakened, but a final, unexpected resistance waited in the place Mary could not reach, his conscience. When Thomas Cranmer was led to Broad Street on 21 March 1556, the crowd expected a simple martyrdom, quiet prayers, a brief flame, and a pious death. But eyewitness accounts reveal something very different. The Marian authorities had arranged the wood carefully, damp green faggots at the base, drier bundles above. This construction did not burn cleanly. It smoked first, trapping the victim in a slow, choking cloud before allowing the flames to rise. This was not an accident. It was a method perfected by Tudor executioners to prolong terror. As the fire was lit, the smoke thickened instantly, swirling around Cranmer and forcing him into a brutal physiological struggle. The first breaths scorched his throat, stripping away the lining of his windpipe and triggering violent coughing. According to burn pathology, inhaling superheated air causes the tissues of the airway to swell rapidly, making each breath feel like dragging shards of glass through the chest. Witnesses noted the convulsions in his arms and legs, spasms caused by nerves firing uncontrollably as heat penetrated muscle. While popular depictions portray Cranmer standing calmly, contemporary observers describe a man reacting to unimaginable pain. The heat tightened his skin until it cracked open, releasing small bursts of steam. Fat beneath the surface began to liquefy, dripping down his wrists like melted wax. Tendons shrank, pulling his fingers into a rigid claw. And yet in this horrific moment, Cranmer performed the act that shocked even those who came to see him die. He thrust his right hand, the hand that had signed his forced recantation, directly into the fire. "This unworthy right hand," he cried, as recorded later in John Fox's Acts and Monuments. Medical knowledge tells us that fingertips are among the most sensitive parts of the body. The nerves fire so rapidly under extreme heat that pain becomes total, overwhelming every other sense. Within seconds, the skin blistered, split, and blackened. The nails curled back, exposing the bone beneath. Yet Cranmer held it there, refusing to pull away, even as the fire climbed his arm. The crowd fell silent. Some reported seeing tears, not from emotion but from the smoke that forced them from his eyes. Others whispered prayers. Many simply stared, unable to reconcile the brutality they were witnessing with the sanitized stories they had been taught about executions. When the flames finally consumed him, the Marian authorities believed they had erased his voice. but they had instead created a symbol stronger than any decree. When the flames finally collapsed into ash, the Marian authorities moved quickly to eliminate every trace of Thomas Cranmer. There would be no relics, no grave, no physical reminder that could inspire loyalty. His remains were swept into a pit of cinders already filled with the ashes of Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley. Witnesses described the act as hurried and deliberate, as if the state feared that even his bones might speak. This erasure was part of a larger strategy. Control the memory, and you control the meaning of his death. Official proclamations released in the days that followed painted Cranmer not as a victim of political vengeance, but as a repentant heretic whose final hours proved the righteousness of Mary's restored Catholic order. Pamphlets circulated claiming he died confessing error, omitting entirely his defiant gesture of burning his own hand. It was an intentional sanitization, replacing a scene of brutal resistance with a polished morality tale. Later generations continued the softening. Victorian writers, preferring tidy martyrdom over psychological complexity, retold the event as peaceful sacrifice, ignoring the engineered cruelty behind it. But the political impact was immediate. Instead of strengthening Mary's authority, Cranmer's death ignited lasting Protestant anger. Yet history has a way of reopening locked doors. The flames that consumed Cranmer's body would eventually expose a truth no regime could bury. In the years that followed Mary's death in 1558, the meaning of Thomas Cranmer's execution shifted completely. With Elizabeth I's accession, Protestantism returned to England, and Cranmer, once paraded as a broken heretic, became the intellectual backbone of the restored church. His writings shaped the Book of Common Prayer, and his final act at the stake transformed him from a defeated prisoner into a symbol of conscience stronger than coercion. While Mary's reign lasted barely 5 years, his legacy endured for centuries, a quiet reminder that state violence can control bodies, but not belief. History did not spare the perpetrators. Mary's legacy remains shadowed by the executions that earned her the name Bloody Mary, a title reflecting the psychological impact of her policies more than any doctrinal triumph. Modern historians now view Cranmer's trial as an example of political theater disguised as religious justice, a pattern still seen whenever governments manipulate confession, repentance, or public humiliation to strengthen authority. Contemporary psychology recognizes the tactics used on Cranmer: isolation, pressure, narrative control, and ritualized punishment. These methods persist today in various forms of state repression. Cranmer's death warns us how easily power can weaponize morality. In exposing the real death of Thomas Cranmer, we return dignity to the victim and strip power from those who tried to burn truth along with the man.